Hey everyone, Sparrow here, and today we're going to talk about what's called reactive narcissism. I don't know of anyone else who is using this term. It's the term that I came up with to describe someone who has been with a narcissist for a long time, or who has been raised by a narcissist, or has to spend a lot of time with them, and they start developing some behaviors of the narcissist. I kind of liken this to reactive attachment disorder, and this disorder happens sometimes in kids who get neglected in early childhood. They don't get their needs met, sometimes they're adopted, and then they start to pull away. So they do the opposite of what they really want or what they should be doing, which is bonding. So reactive narcissism is when you start behaving like the narcissist because you're in that environment and you're being abused emotionally, physically, or otherwise. So when I was doing my research on if anyone else is using this term, I came across something that described the reactive narcissist as someone who was a ruthless businessman who didn't care about his employees and blah, blah, blah. It's a very obscure term. I'm repurposing the term for this specific purpose because we don't really have a term for people who are subjected to narcissistic abuse for a long period of time, and then they start developing traits of the narcissist for no other reason than self-preservation, okay? Now, this can look like many different things. If you're with the narcissist still, this can look like you yelling back at them, you starting to lie to them because it's not safe to tell the truth, or you just don't want to have the argument. You gaslighting them because you're so sick of it and you want to give them a taste of their own medicine. You putting up huge boundaries or walls because you just can't let anybody in because it's too scary, it's painful. You get betrayed, and then you probably have a good amount of betrayal trauma, which I've talked about in another video that I'll link. But anyway, it's all of their behaviors a lot of times. Sometimes people who are struggling with reactive narcissism will even become cheaters because they've had that wall up to the partner. They need to get their needs met. And I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. It's not a good thing to do. But sometimes, again, they're doing it out of self-preservation. So a lot of times I see this in clients who leave the narcissist and then become single and then don't date anybody for a long period of time. And they do just put up the Berlin Wall because they don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to get hurt. And they're keeping everybody at arm's length. So there's that. And then there's all shades of gray in between. If you've been raised by a narcissist, sometimes you'll go out into the world with that protective barrier. And even though you're not a true narcissist, you might have a lot of those behaviors because you're just really putting up that wall. You want to protect yourself, and you want to value yourself. You're saying, hey, these people didn't value me, but I value me, and you can't cross my boundary, or you can't blink funny at me because it's going to trigger me and I might lash out at you. And I'll see this a lot, especially in women who just become overly aggressive, sometimes in men too, but women, they just become so overly protective because nobody was there to protect them when they needed it. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. First off, years ago, I worked with a kiddo who was being bullied at school, and this kiddo, we'll call him Tyler. He was so cute and sweet, but he was really quiet. He didn't stand up for himself very much, and he was being bullied. And I did a lot of role playing with him. I gave him a lot of tools and things to say to the bully. And one day he came into my office, he had this big grin on his face. And so I said, okay, hey, what's going on? And his mom said, well, he had a success with the bully, but we need to talk about it. I said, okay, what happened? So he told me that he was outside, the bully came up to him, and he said, I just looked at him and said, F off. And I said, oh my goodness, okay, well, we didn't rehearse that one. And I said, well, what did the bully say to you? And I thought, my gosh, he would have had to say something so egregious to get that response. And Tyler said, oh no, he just said hi. I was like, okay, here's an example of reactive narcissism, right? He just put up that wall. He protected himself. He went to the nth degree. And it was funny because his mom was saying, well, I don't know if I should ground him for cussing somebody out. And, you know, we kind of figured all that out. And Tyler was able to find a happy medium in order, you know, where he could still communicate well and set a boundary and preserve himself, protect himself. So I will tell you this. I have experienced this myself personally and professionally, and I have to really watch it because I would say at this stage, you know, I can be a real asshole when I'm protecting my boundary. And it's probably just because, you know, years and years of dealing with narcissist parents. I had a borderline mom, a narcissistic dad, some narcissistic siblings, several narcissistic ex-partners, and you know, for years I bit my tongue. I didn't say the things that I really wanted to say. I held it in. I tried to make it work. I tried to make the peace over here, make the peace over there, and every time I tried to confront something, it didn't work well. Even though I was polite, I was kind. And then it was really in my 40s that I just started getting more vocal about things and calling people out and just saying, no, this is not okay. And really becoming quite blunt. And I noticed I was also starting to do it in my practice, right? When I was a psychotherapist. And I remember one specific instance where I was working with this married couple, and the husband was a covert narcissist, and I believe he had a little bit of Asperger type tendencies, and he really drove his wife nuts. He was obsessive, he was repetitive, he ruminated, he complained a lot. He really just sucked the air out of the room. And I remember being in session, and he told a story that he had told 3 or 4 other times, and he kept bringing it up. And this was the story. He was going to be this great American author. He was in his office with the door shut, typing away on his manuscript. His wife comes into the office, waters a plant, and leaves. He loses this great big idea, never gets it back, and it's all her fault that he didn't become this prolific writer. And, you know, the first time he told the story, I was like, okay, wow, we've got some real false narratives going on. We've got some real victimizing going on. He's a victim, blaming, you know, this one instance where she came and watered a plant. And the 4th time he started telling the story, I stopped him. I said, no, you can't tell me that story again. If you tell me that story one more time, I'm going to have a seizure right in this chair. And he just was shocked. I was kind of shocked that I said that, but you know, looking back, I'm glad I said it. His wife consequently started laughing, and then she couldn't stop. And she almost ended up on the floor, just in hysterics, because that was something she wanted to say to him for years and years and years, and she never did. She held it in. She tried to be polite and kind, keep it together for the kids, you know, all of this. And I think in that moment, I just gave her permission. And it was funny. I mean, I think it took her like 10 minutes to get her act together. She just laughed, and I was trying not to laugh, but I was like, look, man, you can't keep blaming her for the fact that you're not a writer. And shortly after that, she filed for divorce. I mean, she was long gone. She couldn't stand this guy. And really and truly, he was a very difficult person to like, very hard to find something likable about this gentleman. But anyway, that moment was one of several that made me realize, like, I can't do the traditional psychotherapy thing anymore. This is not my gig. I'm way more outspoken. I'm more of a coach. And it was shortly after that that I switched my practice. I transitioned over into coaching, and I retired from traditional psychotherapy because there again, a lot of therapists don't say what they want to say. They're afraid of chasing their client away. They're afraid of alienating them. And they sit there and they just nod their head and they go, well, let's try to look at it like this. And they're just so Pollyanna, and they don't call it out. I call things out personally, professionally, I just do. And that's my personality, and I embrace it. But here's the deal. We can't be, if we find ourselves being overly vigilant, then we really need to take a step back and say, okay, what's happening here? Do I feel powerless? Do I feel trapped? Do I feel disenchanted? Let's face it, if you live with a narcissist, you're probably disenchanted a lot of the time. But a lot of times it comes back to feeling powerless. So when I realize I'm hyper-focusing on what other people say, or when I get triggered in those ways, I ask myself, okay, what's the self-care looking like? And sometimes I check the box, right? Okay, well, I'm getting good sleep. I'm eating well, I'm exercising. But one of the things that comes back over and over is like, I'm not having enough fun. I'm not experiencing enough joy in my life. Maybe it's too much work, maybe it's too much commitment, responsibility, whatever the case. So I frequently have to come back to that. And I can tell you this, if you're living with a narcissist, you're probably experiencing a very joyless life, or largely joyless. Probably not having a lot of fun. If you're with a covert narcissist, forget it. It's like you need an oxygen tank to even breathe. They suck the air out of the room, constantly complaining, sulking, the sighs, the rolling of the eyes, the whining. It's so intense, and it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. So, you've got to really think about that. But if you notice, and by the way, I have a lot of clients that ask me, am I the narcissist? I'm like, no, you're not the narcissist. Well, I lose my temper a lot. Right, because you're a real person. And when you're living in an oppressed environment with a narcissist, and you actually care about yourself, you're going to self-preserve. And one of the ways people do that is by lashing out and saying, arguing or yelling or saying this is not okay, and engaging. So here's the deal. Here's the main difference between a narcissist and a reactive narcissist. Reactive narcissist, you're still very much based in reality. The whole crux of narcissism is they're not based in reality, and they will frequently try to change reality in little ways and big ways. They have to paint a picture of the world and of themselves. They have to project it out that's not real. It's like they're creating a constant movie. It's not real. You, my friend, you might be yelling, you might be threatening, you might be throwing things. Let's just face it, you might be. But yet, you probably don't have that level of narcissism because you're somewhat rooted in reality. You realize, like, this is bullshit, this is wrong, this is not making me happy, I don't like living like this, I don't like being lied to, I don't like being gaslit, I don't like, whatever it is. And so that's the key difference. Now, can they slowly turn us into stone? They can, and we don't want to let that happen. If you notice yourself acting more and more like the narcissist, then get some help. Read some books, find a professional, read my book, Uncaged, which is all about trauma recovery and helping heal from things like narcissism. But do something, because the more you live with the narcissist, or the more you spend time with them, the more they are going to turn you into the Grinch. They're going to turn you into stone. Not okay. So you don't want that. Bottom line, reactive narcissism is a real thing. Don't beat yourself up about it. So a lot of people are like, okay, what do I do? First off, sometimes when you're in a situation where you haven't been standing up for yourself, you've just been kind of rolling over, you've been taking it, and then you start standing up for yourself, you start yelling, or you start, fighting back. Sometimes that pendulum has to swing the other way. And sometimes I tell people, let it be for now. If that's what you need to do right now to build your chops, to get your feet planted, then do it. Do it. If you find things escalating, you're throwing things, you're fighting, or, in combat, don't do any of that. Don't do anything that's going to risk you going to jail, getting arrested, or just creating abusive environments for your children that you can't take back, any of that stuff. If you find it's getting really bad, then leave, or ask the narcissist to leave, or come up with a plan. But sometimes it's okay to be an asshole. Sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's kind of fun. You're not going to hear that from any other therapist, but guess what? I'm retired. I can say the things that all the therapists we talk about behind closed doors, that we don't say to our clients, we certainly don't say on YouTube. I can say those things, but sometimes it's a little bit healing to be the asshole for once. So let yourself do it from time to time. If that works for you. If you're in a situation where it's violent and you're with a malignant narcissist or a violent narcissist, not okay. This is not the advice for you. But what I'm saying is, if you find yourself a bit reactive narcissistic, then don't beat yourself up about it. Don't shame yourself about it, but just say, okay, I'm turning into this person. I don't really like this person. I don't want to turn into them. But maybe I can turn into a much more assertive version of myself, and that's okay. And then for me, someone like me, you go into perimenopause and you're in your 50s, you're like, yeah, I don't really care. I'm an asshole and you deserve it. So my advice is, don't be a jerk to people who don't deserve it, okay? If you're gonna be rude, if you're gonna act out, make sure that person really deserves it. And make sure it's worth it. Make sure it's worth your time, because if you keep engaging, and I'm gonna make another video about this, then that really takes away from your health. It lowers your immunity, it raises your cortisol, it prematurely ages you, and that's not okay. And it sucks the joy out of your life. So think about that. But again, bottom line, this is a real thing. And it doesn't mean that you're the narcissist. It means that you've been, what do they say? You're an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, if you're spending a lot of time with a narcissist, guess what? You're gonna start acting like them. So check out my other video. Hug yourself from me, guys, as always. And oh, by the way, if this was helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Really want to get the word out, because nobody's talking about these kinds of things and they need to be said. So guys, take care, and we'll see you next time.